My name is Ammar Campa Najjar. Thank my mom for that long name. And I'm running for Congress against Duncan Hunter Jr. And the reason I'm running, there's a lot of reasons I'm running, but one of the reasons I'm running, and I tell people, and I mean it sincerely, even though it's kind of gimmicky, is that we don't need another Hunter in Congress. We need a gatherer. Somebody who will bring people together, and that's been kind of the signature of my life. From the background that I come from, the experiences I've had, the service that I've led. And really before I get started, I want to say thank you, not just for those of you just coming here today, but I'm looking in this room and I know there are people who have been fighting the good fight for equality and opportunity longer than I've been alive, so that someone like me, a Latino Arab American, could declare proudly that I'm running for Congress. That wouldn't happen if it weren't for all of you fighting that good fight. And Indivisible is a living embodiment of that struggle for equality, for opportunity, for inclusion. And people ask me, are you part of Indivisible? Are you part of the resistance? And I tell them, I don't know. I mean, I'm a Latino Arab American and the son of a Muslim immigrant. As far as I'm concerned, my family is the resistance, right? When you're talking about the wall and the band, you're talking about my family. So I'm extremely indebted and thankful for all the hard work that you all are doing. Every time you protest, every step you take, it's a step in advocacy of what my family's about and what this country's about. So the reason I'm running right now, and I think it's a special time, is because this is a where were you moment in the life of our country. It's not like another time. People will look back at this time and they'll ask every single one of us, where were you when people were literally fighting for their lives? Not figuratively, but literally fighting for their lives, for their constitutional rights, for their health care. And I want to say that despite what the cynics said, we led with our values. And we weren't afraid to lead with our values. And we made sure that we were able to pave a path towards a unified future. We didn't feel divided. And one thing I'll pledge to all of you is that I'd rather lose exploring every way to unite this country than win exploiting every single way to divide it. I refuse to do that. And so what does that look like? It looks like listening and learning and leading and going to places as far-flung as, here in Hamul, which is where I live, in Julian, and Ramona, and Lakeside, and talking and listening to people who don't agree with my views at all, on site. I went to Lakeside to a junior rodeo, and I was the only brown person there. And I was fine with that. And I went there and I didn't tell people I was running, I just showed up. And I just was talking to the kids. It was a junior rodeo for FFA and 4-H. And it was a great program. They raised like $25,000, all of which goes to putting these kids through school. An incredible program. And they're showcasing their swine and their cows, and that's how they make their living. And I went and I asked one of the kids if I could help them between rounds, help them clean their pig. I said, sure. And I still have, the stuff on my shoes. I won't say what it is, but you know what it is. And I started cleaning the swine. And every time I would turn on the faucet, the parent would turn off the faucet. I'm like, this is really weird. And then I did it again. I turned it off. Oh, this is borderline rude. What's going on here? Am I not allowed to clean a swine? And I said, okay, so what's going on? They said, we have to ration our water because of the drought. And I said, okay. And then they started talking about the drought's not just affecting this junior rodeo, it's affecting our farms. It's affecting our way of life. And they call it the variability of weather patterns affecting their crops, which is climate change, but they'll never say. But that's what they call it, the variability of weather. Well, okay. And we started talking about that, and then they finally just said, okay, so what are you doing? We've never seen you before. Who are you? And I was like, I'm running for Congress. I'm running for Congress, and they're like, okay. And they're like, against who? And I was like, Duncan Hunter. Like, oh, well, we're all Hunter supporters. In fact, he's good friends of ours. So I figured. And they said, is he here? They assumed we were both peacocking for votes. And I said, he's not. And then one gentleman said, he's never been here before. And so showing up is half the battle. When I talk about the where were you moment, that was a where were you moment. And so they started asking me questions about, all right, Mr. Congressman, if you're so smart, what are you going to do about the fact that my crops are withering on the vine, and I can't do this anymore the way I used to. All my acreage is not being put to good use. I don't want my kids to be doing this forever. The idea of having children is to have them have better lives than I had. Eventually, I want them to go on to lead lives, keep the farm, but do something else too. And I said, well, how old is your son? He's 18. Okay. So I worked at the Department of Labor. I'm a small business owner who also led a national jobs creating program at the Department of Labor called Apprenticeship. And unlike any of the candidates running, I've actually worked in Washington. I know how the levers of government work. And I think we've seen from Trump that one skill set isn't transferable to the next, right? You need someone who knows what they're doing and has a job. You would never send me to go to a special ops office, for example. Never done it before. So, but I know how government works. And so I was telling them, why don't you have your son do an apprenticeship program? These are programs that are earn while you learn programs, train while you gain. It pays an average of $60,000 a year, which is double the median individual income. We'll train him to create or manufacture or at least assemble the solar panels. And then you could put those solar panels on your farm and you could do solar farming and reroute that energy back to your city and make a profit. And in a generation, if we keep doing that, guess what? The variability of weather that you're talking about, we can fix some of that. And he was like, that's pretty damn good. And we kept talking, and then that day, the media is in love with this, me running because of the whole Latino Arab thing. They like it, I'm using it to highlight things that matter. And so BBC came and they were doing a day in the life of a candidate, which is great. And I said, look, can I turn the cameras on these kids? Because apparently they're not being taken care of or no one's aware of their struggles. Not even their congressman shows up. And the kids were like, BBC, I love, what's it called? Top Gear. It's a race show. And I was like, BBC, that's awesome. And the parents were like, their guard went down. And they started beaming with pride. And I said, you know what? We really appreciate what you're doing for our kids. And they said, a couple of them said, we're going to vote for you. And I was like, you were Hunter supporters. And I was like, oh, that's sweet. They're just saying that. I mean, it's the sleeves off their vest. They're not giving me anything. And then my friend goes to the Rock Church. He calls me and says, there's a lady here the next day, or the Saturday. Next day, but there's a lady who was saying she's going to vote for a Mexican Arab guy who's running for Congress. That I believe. That conversation with 5 people turns into a conversation with 100 people. And that's how you win. I'm old school. I'm young, but I'm old school. Nothing beats that. So when people ask me, can we flip this district? Absolutely. Because I've seen parts of it get flipped. For someone who you would think can't win votes in that area. Most Democrats say don't even go to Lakeside. Don't even bother with those voters who say they voted for Hunter. But here I am, a guy who just walks up to people and has a conversation, not about politics. I didn't even tunnel the Democrats. We talked about issues, and that's how we win. Talking about issues, showing that you're qualified, and you care about their kids. And we always talk about how love is love, gay pride, all that stuff. Pain is pain, regardless of your views or your views. And that's something that I'm able to do with voters across this district. So that's the approach that I'm bringing to this campaign. And people ask me, well, do you think there's a prospect here? I said, you better believe it. And, people say, well, you're a skinny guy with a funny name. How can you win? Well, there was a skinny guy with a funny name in 2008 that this district voted for. His name was Barack Obama. And it worked. So don't tell me that we can't do that. Don't tell me that we can't, live by the values of Indivisible, right? Because there are a lot of people out there that are willing to look past my views if I have the right views. And when they ask me, well, do you think that we could, combat the worst calamities of climate change? I say that together we can. And when they ask me, do you think we could actually pass sensible single-payer health care? I say that together. Can we pass immigration reform in a sensible way? I say that together. Can we give workers the rights they need? I say that together. Can we ensure that the future shines brightly in the eyes of our children with a good education? I say that together. And can we elect the first ever Latino Arab American, who's half Arab, half Latino, but 100% American, to Congress? I know that together we can. Only together we can. So I want to hear more from all of you. My whole thing about, I don't have any consultants. It's a volunteer, people-powered campaign. And I want my closest advisors are people. And some of the people, most insightful people I've talked to are the ones who will never vote for me, because they inform how I'll serve them in Congress. It's not just my voters I'm going to serve, it's my future constituents, every single one of them. Even the ones who despise me, especially the ones who despise me. So my whole thing is listen, learn, lead. And so I'm here today to listen and learn and show you how I'm going to lead. Thank you. Oh. So 15, the winning lottery number? Anybody?
15?
Yeah.
Who's got 15?
Are they just shy? Should I go for another?
Ammar, can you speak up a little louder?
I can. Did no one hear what I said?
No, we heard.
Okay. I talked about a rodeo and some stuff. No? All right. So my name is Ammar Campa. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. So does anybody have 15?
I'll have a really specific question because you caught me off guard. So I live in Flint Springs, so I'm sort of in the no man's land, El Cajon, Lakeside, Alpine, not any of them. So, and I'm with groups like the San Diego Democrats for Environmental Action. Has anyone talked to you about the proposed sand mine in Lakeside, which is a very divisive issue?
No one's. I've heard of it, but no one's.
By the highway?
It's a proposed development in El Monte Valley.
Okay.
Because that's something I'd be glad to talk about, because it is dividing the community.
I'd love to hear more about what both sides are saying.
Yeah. Well, and maybe then I could follow up with just a general question. I'm very much volunteered for environmental issues all along. What do you see so far in speaking to people as your biggest communication challenge regarding getting on board with environmental issues?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And the biggest challenge to talking about the environment is just when you say the word climate change, the phrase, people get turned off. And when I was talking to those farmers in Lakeside, they said the variability of weather patterns. And that's fine. They could call it whatever they want. But, I think climate change is a very important issue. I think it's the mother of all problems, to be honest. Climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's a healthcare issue. My grandmother had emphysema by working close to smog in a cannery. So it's a healthcare issue. It's a housing issue, because houses are being engulfed by flames and fires. People who've lived in homes for 30 years are now losing them as a result to the hots getting hotter. So you tell a Republican who lost their home if climate change is real and they lose their home. I've talked to them, and they said, yeah, I do. It's an immigration and national security issue. The civil war in Syria started from a drought. And when you have a strain on resources, it causes that kinds of problem. So it's the mother of all problems. In every category, if you think about an issue, climate change is somewhere in the discussion. Somewhere it's the cause. So it's the mother of all problems, but it's also the mother of all solutions. Like I talked about that young man whose father said, put my son into an apprenticeship and give him $60K to assemble solar panels. And we could empower and embolden small business owners to make that transition. Not overnight. We don't want to disrupt people's lives, and we can't just overnight do it. But I think we could do it in a responsible and a fairly rapid way. So I think one of the most difficult things is talking about the nuances of the environment. Some people don't care about the environmental aspect of climate change. But if you talk to them about the other aspects, the healthcare aspect, or the national security threats, or the business opportunity, let's pretend for a moment that human beings don't cause climate change, even though they do. Because if you take 10 billion tons of carbon out of the earth and emit it into the air, do you think we're contributing even just a little bit, maybe? I think at least a little. But let's say if we're not causing it. What if we adopted a alternative energy, mentality, and help people transition, which is my biggest focus, is, making sure that, we live in this changing world, and we're going to have to, at some point in the next generation, make a big transition from blue collar to new collar jobs, and from blue collar to green collar jobs. So what if we adopted a pro-environment business model here in the 50th? I think that would help solve a lot of what's ailing people in terms of joblessness and lack of economic opportunity. So I think the biggest problem is talking about climate change with those words, and the biggest benefit is talking about how it's a catch-all. And I've talked to people who are climate change deniers about jobs and manufacturing on this green platform, and they support it. So I think that's the solution to that problem. Does that make sense? Yeah, of course. How about one? Hi. Of course.
Mr. Ammar,
Mm-hmm.
I get nervous so I have to.
I get nervous when people call me Mr. Ammar. I feel like I'm going to the principal's office.
Okay, Ammar.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe that applicants for Border Patrol and ICE jobs should be required to take a polygraph and background check to find out if they have a history of violent or ethnic bias behavior? This might reduce the incidence of agents randomly picking up families, separating them from their children, and incarcerating the parents. I'd like to know your view on that. I think I can guess.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I have a friend who she's Latina and she wanted to be part of Border Patrol and she couldn't pass because she gets nervous. So that's going to affect her one way, but a large swath of people, I think it would be good to have them go through that background check, and above and beyond that, to kind of talk about how do we make sure that we have law enforcement that is enforcing the law and not using their power to, mistreat people across different backgrounds and ethnicities, not just with the immigrant Latino community. And I think one thing we could do is make sure that our law enforcement reflects the communities they're serving, right? And build this trust between communities. And I think demonizing the community or law enforcement and painting a broad stroke actually does a disservice to the idea of keeping people safe. But I think one thing is to make sure that we do have proper screening for people who are in law enforcement, just like we want proper screening for those who are coming to our country. I mean, that's a good thing to do. And I don't like to talk about the second piece, because you mentioned immigration. I don't like people who look at immigration as an us versus them, because I was born in this country, and I lived in the Middle East, in a war-torn part of the Middle East in Gaza for a couple years. And I came back to this country on the eve of 9/11 in August. I left a war zone, me and my family, only to have war follow us like a disease. And I remember just how difficult life was being an Arab American in a post-9/11 world. And so not only was it devastating to me, someone who was fleeing a war zone, at that time it was hard to even grieve with my fellow Americans because they were suspicious of us, right? And that's what terror did to the Arab community. And that's what bad actors within any community does for the entire community. It misrepresents an entire community. So when I think about securing our border, I don't think about it as Americans versus immigrants. I think about it as especially those who flee and leave everything they've ever known to pursue everything they've ever dreamed of. People who are fleeing persecution and crime. They come here for the chance of a safe and secure life. So I do think we need to secure our borders, but we don't have to have a draconian immigration policy that begins with like the institutional discrimination of people, and also we have a couple bad apples who could be weeded out by simply having lie detector tests. So I'm all for that, but I think there's a broader conversation about immigration that we have to talk about. And to be honest, I think another benefit of me being in this race is that I'm able to talk about the nuances given my background in a way that some people feel like they can't because they have to be politically correct. But as somebody who left a war zone and desperately wanted to come to a secure country and lost that the month later, I understand the concerns of making sure that we secure our country. But at the same time, my father, his parents were killed in front of him when he was 11 years old. He lived in a Muslim country. And it was in the middle of a war, a civil war. And he rejected radicalism. Think about it. He was an orphan at 11 years old. So he was the perfect recruit for terror. They target those kinds of kids, disenfranchised kids, just like kids in our country who go into gangs, they don't have a parent or something of that sort, right? The same thing. They don't have adult figures in their life, and my dad lost his at a young age. But not despite his faith, he's Muslim, I'm Christian. That's a whole different conversation that we have at the dinner table. But not just despite his faith, but because of his faith, he rejected radicalism. And a few years later, he chose America. And thank God, America chose him. And my dad went on to be a business owner, tax-paying, American-loving man who has 2 sons, and one of them's running for Congress. So don't tell me that immigrants don't make America more American, right? So I totally agree with the idea of making sure we have the right personnel for securing our border and making sure that they're compassionate in their approach, but we also have to be unapologetic about the fact that we have to have security in our country, especially for those who are fleeing persecution. But the question is how we do it. And it has to be humane, and it can't be racist, to be honest. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
14?
Well, you already answered probably half of my questions. Let me just go for the second half. You say that we can't have single-payer health care. The American Affordable Care Act was a lifesaver to me because I have 2 pre-existing conditions, which meant basically it was almost a house payment for me to have insurance before, and I couldn't afford it. And last year I got very sick, and it saved my life because there's no way we could have afforded the hospital bills that came through. How do you foresee, with what is going on right now and them tearing down the Affordable Care Act, how do you foresee being able to bring it back to something that would help people again?
That's a great question. And thank you for that testimony. So I worked in the White House in 2013 for a year until I went to the Department of Labor. And I worked on the Affordable Care Act. And look, here, I'll be honest. The Affordable Care Act was really good on care. And it wasn't the ultimate solution on affordable. Some people still are paying healthcare premiums that are the same as their mortgages, and they have no disposable income by the time they're done. That's not the American dream. You don't just live to work. You work to live. And the Affordable Care Act did help give some alleviation. My mom has pre-existing conditions as well, and it was a lifesaver for her. And the one thing I've learned about government is that it's really hard to give people new things. It's almost impossible to take things away from people. I don't think we'll ever go back to a time when we're going to have a country or a healthcare system where people don't get treated if they have pre-existing conditions, or imposing lifetime limits, or if you're 26 years old and younger, you get to stay on your parents' health care. I don't think we're going to ever change that. I think we're going to keep that. And you see that in town halls. Even Republicans come out screaming at Hunter and Darrell Issa and other people. So I don't think we're ever going to go to a place where we remove that. I think they're going to try to, but it'll become so politically unpopular that it'll never happen. And so I think we've established a good baseline for the next phase of healthcare. And so one of the things I want to do on healthcare is, if I'm elected, if there's a bill on single payer, I'll vote for it. But what I would do is I want to author a bill that adds another step. And I think making healthcare affordable, more affordable. And I think if we expanded Medicare for folks who are 50 and older, and give them an option to buy in at a very lower rate, because it all goes to service. It's not for profit, so it's overhead and then service. What that would do is it would broaden the base of people in the system, and that would reduce all the rates, and it would force the free market, in order to compete with that pool, to lower their rates, and that way we wouldn't be passing on the cost of healthcare generally to younger folks, which is what the current system tries to do. Which I'm okay doing that for all of you. So that's the first thing I would do. move us one more step towards single payer. And I've talked to Republicans about that, and I tell them, what do you think about that? They're like, oh, it's a great idea. And I tell them, what if we expand it for everybody? And that's like an incremental mental step that they go from saying, okay, instead of saying single payer government takeover is how they think. Again, it's just the words you use, this like backdoor progressivism that I call, right? And you slowly kind of walk people through it. So I think that we can pass single payer healthcare, and the reason I think is because there's no turning back. And I also think that there's a lot of people like certain senators like Warren and Bernie who are trying to pass single-payer healthcare in the Senate. And if I was in Congress, I would absolutely do that. My question is, I'm a businessman, so I want to know how are we going to pay for it? Because I don't want the middle class to foot the bill. But if you got, insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies especially, and you cut their tax break by half, they get like $1 trillion tax break. If we cut that in half by 5 and give them only $500 billion, that other $500 billion would be all we need to finance single-payer healthcare. The question is, how do we apply pressure on them? And the answer is getting elected officials who aren't beholden to those kinds of dollars. So I've had a purely people-powered campaign, and we've raised a lot of money just from just ordinary folks, small dollars. And so with me, my goal is to be in Congress and not be beholden to any private interests except for the interests of the people I swore to serve. And so we need more people like that. So I think the most important question you can ask people is, well, who are you beholden to? Because once you get elected, you might have these great ideas, but then you have to quid pro quo and reciprocate to those who've given you the means by which you got elected. So my pledge is not to take dark money, for example. That's really important. And I won't take any money with strings attached, right? If they want to give me money but there's no strings attached, that's fine, but I'd prefer to run a people-powered campaign. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but when I talk to people about this, when I talk to Republicans, I've talked to some folks and they say, you know what, I'm an illness away from losing my home. There's no political party when they say that. That's a real fear. And a homeless man, a veteran, wrote to me, and he said, I've been at an event in El Cajon. He said, thank you for coming to our event, and I wanted to write to you, and I'm sorry if you can't read my handwriting. I had to sell my computer to get my medicine this month. And a mother who said, I have to work 2 jobs to, afford health care. And I had to miss my daughter's birthday because of it. These are the kinds of things that animate me to think, how can we outsmart the system? How can we, not just have somebody who's electable, but somebody who will be accountable and responsible, who could really push through that. And so what I would do is, how do we move towards single payer? I think that Medicare, expanding it, and then moving forward. And I guarantee you, if I'm elected, I'll fight tooth and nail to make sure we never go back to a time when someone like you or my mother can't have health care for pre-existing conditions. 14? Oh, okay. 12.
That's me. I think you pretty much answered it as well. I was going to ask you if you had any comments on the California health bill.
Yeah, I'm for it. I think the only question is, how do we finance it? People are still asking that question. But Tony Atkins is a smart woman, and they'll figure it out. But it's a very important question. And what about the back pay that workers already negotiated with their employers? Where does that money go? And the idea is that it goes, and they get paid, they get a check back, and the funds go to a general pool that then the whole state uses. And I think there probably is room for, if people want to pay more, if people who have money, if they want to get private insurance, if they want to, they can. And I think there's a value to that, only because, the private sector is the hub of innovation, right? We have to continue to come up with innovative means to take care of people. And so it's going to continue to be the laboratory of innovation. So if people who want to pay above and beyond what they're paying in taxes, who are wealthy, for the single payer, if they want to pay for private insurance too, because they have the means and they want the best quality available, then God love them. Let them do that. And then we'll have that innovation trickle down to the single payer model. But I am for single-payer healthcare. 2.
What do you see as the role of federally protected lands, like, for example, national monuments, especially in light of the Trump administration's current scrutiny of such entities with the apparent aim of reducing their protective powers?
I think it's important to protect our lands. I mean, and I think what we need to do is Congress needs to step up and step in where the Secretary of Interior and Trump are faltering. So I would push back against that. I'd push back against that, and also the reduced EPA regulations. That's also causing harm to our environment. So, because I realize I'm being long-winded on all my questions, the brief answer is I think that there is a role to play, and to make sure that not just on the federal level with Congress, but nonprofits and other groups push back and resist and insist and persist against these kinds of draconian measures that hurts our environment. It hurts everybody. So that's my quick answer to that question. I don't know if it answers it fully, but that's my posture towards that.
Well, I guess what I think is something is that the Trump administration is thinking of shrinking at least one national monument and making it much smaller, and keeping the area that is more visited by tourists and has certain archaeological value and so forth, but basically, theoretically, opening up the rest to possibly private interests to make profit. And I'm not speculating just a little bit about why they're doing that. But I even heard that they're thinking of reviewing all national monuments in the West that are over 100,000 acres, I think it was, which is that's a lot of extra acreage that they're looking at chopping.
Yeah, I think we have so much land that's not used. I mean, in El Cajon, there's like, I think 25% of just unused land that's not related to national monuments. We have so much land that we don't have to tap into national monuments to build industries. So I'd say leave them alone entirely, and fight back at every turn and say there's alternative places to use land for commercial use. And I think it's important, obviously, to use land for commercial use, to bring industry, to create jobs. But we don't have to go and tap into our national monuments. So I think it's just he's just trying to once again be divisive, I think, and I think he knows that. And so I think part of what he wants us to do is to be upset about a lot of things, to where his supporters think that we're unreasonable. But this is a fight worth having, as are all the fights, the Paris Agreement, everything else. But it's our posture. I think what I've learned is when I talk to Trump supporters and I tell them where I disagree with the president, if I lead with that, they get turned off. And my job is to bring people together. Your job is to put pressure on me and make sure I don't lose sight of the important issues in my attempt to bring people together. So you need to speak loudly and fight and persist and resist and insist and protest, every single one of you. And I'll do my job of bringing people together around the values that you speak up on. So on that, I'd encourage you to keep fighting back, and I'll do my job in explaining how it doesn't make sense. We have plenty of land elsewhere where we could invest in and grow commercial ventures at. Yeah. 19, did I say that one already?
I think most of us here would be very delighted to have Arab, Mexican, American represent us from this district. I wonder how you would overcome all of the hatred and fear-mongering and general propaganda against you that will come at you from the Republicans, from not just your opponent, but from all kinds of well-heeled, nasty people.
Yeah, I think if I'm strong on the issues and I'm strong on jobs and I talk about how I want to help different communities, that will allay some concerns. But at the same time, I know that an attack on me will galvanize every single one of you. And so, fine, go ahead. They can knock themselves out. But here's the question is, how am I going to win? Am I electable? And the question is yes, and I'll tell you why. 36, if we want to look at just straight numbers, 36% of the district is Latino. 60% of the district is Caucasian. Of that 60%, 15% of it is Middle Eastern Caucasian. So 51% of the district, a very thin majority, is yours truly. But you know I'm not running on race. You know that. They want to put that on me, but I'm not running on race. I don't care about your hues. I care about pain is pain. And so that's the number, right? 44% of the district is Republican. 27% of the district is Democrat. And 24% of the district is independent. So actually, Republicans are in the minority. The question is, how do we make the demographic the electorate? And it's all about turnout. And it's all about organizing and mobilizing. Duncan Hunter has never gotten more than 115,000 votes. There's 750,000 people in that district, in our district. He's never gotten more than 130,000 votes during a non-presidential year. He got 175 last year during a presidential. It just goes up because more people vote. But I need 130,000 votes from somewhere. There's 100,000 Democrats that are registered to vote. There are 100,000 Latinos in the whole district. There's 100,000 people who are 17 to 27 who will be 18 by 2018, the 17-year-olds. And if I get them to vote for me, they'll drag their parents into the voting booth, regardless of their political persuasion. That's what studies show. So if I'm able to pull from minority groups, from the Democrats, from the youth, and win over some Republicans with my message that has been working in small anecdotal places like Lakeside and Ramona, that's the pathway to victory. And when I ask about, do you remember who James Kimber is? Anybody remember? Okay. So, exactly. He ran in 2014, and he was a veteran, and he was Caucasian, and he didn't win. And part of the reason is, I don't know personally, and I ask a lot of my veteran friends in the district, how many veterans do you know that are Democrat? And thank you. But there's not a whole lot of them, right? And there's there you go. But there's not a whole lot of them, and there's more Republican veterans than Democrats, and they won't make that switch when Hunter's the incumbent. But there's a lot of Latinos, even if they're Republican, they'll vote for me. There's a lot of Middle Eastern folks who are like, I went to a Christian church in Escondido, and by the way, the mayor of Escondido is Middle Eastern, and that's part of our district. He's Republican and crazy, but Middle Eastern. I don't claim him. They all said, "So are you a Democrat or Republican?" And I was like, "I'm a small business owner." Like, okay, that's cute, but answer the question. I'm Democrat. I was like, "Oh, no one's going to vote for you." I said, "Okay." He said, They said, "I didn't mean us. We're all going to vote for you." And they're like, "Do you have an envelope for checks?" And I gave them my envelopes. They started giving me money. They said, "We're going to vote for you because you're one of us, but they're not going to vote for you." And every time I go to a group, I'm like, "Who's they exactly?" Like, who's they? The Republicans in Ramona, or the ones in Lakeside, the Latinos, the people of Indivisible? Tell me who that is, because we're all demonizing this so-called "they won't vote for you." But everywhere I go, I see people who are supportive. So who is they, and are there enough of us, 130,000 of us, to change that? And that's how we do it. So that's one of the answers on demographic. When it comes to issues, my number one thing is jobs. Jobs is still the number one issue for everybody. Arguably, if everybody had a really good paying job, like an incredibly good paying job, we would never have to talk about affordable health care or housing or affordable anything, because everybody could afford the market-based price. We don't live in a utopia, so that's not going to happen. But the dignity of a good, well-paying, long-term, meaningful job is, I think, the thing that's going to bring us all together. And I've seen it. So people talk about immigration. Immigrants come and take jobs. First of all, they do jobs that a lot of people wouldn't want to do. Okay? The second thing is there's 6 million job vacancies today in this country. So, and the third thing is we shouldn't be concerned about immigrants as much as we are about robots. The robots are coming. They're taking our jobs. So, automation is a bigger threat to the working class than immigration. And a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So today, Donald Trump, there's a competitive selection of wrong and stupid things he does on a given day. But today, he signed an executive order to expand apprenticeship programs. And he's not going to really do much because Obama wanted to double and diversify apprenticeship, and I was on the front lines of that. I just know he's going to leave it alone, which is good. Like, it's not broken, don't fix it, leave it alone. And I tweeted at him today, I said, instead of building a wall, why don't you build up working families and build out the middle class again and really focus on apprenticeship. And the beauty about apprenticeship is it's the solution to filling those job gaps, that 6 million job vacancies. And so in the rural parts of my district, apprenticeship could be the saving grace. And regardless if you're a Republican or Democrat, if you pull that off and you know how to pull it off, they'll vote for you. And, you know, the best paying jobs these days are IT jobs. They pay 50% more than the average job. And I worked with the Secretary of Labor, who's a DNC chair now, and the Secretary of Agriculture on this program that brings IT jobs to rural America. And what we're seeing is offshoring those jobs actually is not a cost-saving thing anymore. It used to be. It went from 37% cost saving down to 27% in a decade, and it's declining. On top of that, the cost of energy to ship away the resources for them to do it abroad is also prohibitive. It's also costing money. On top of that, countries like China got rid of their one-child rule, which means they have bigger households, which means they need more money, which means they're competing for more wages. And the ironic thing is IT has made it to where we live in the most interconnected age in human history, and people in other countries are seeing how American workers fight for their wages, and they're doing the same thing. So we're more productive. The cost-saving mechanism of offshoring jobs isn't working. So now businesses are looking for low-cost areas to invest in, and that's rural America, because it's the standard of living is lower. And the beauty of it is, unlike big cities, rural areas are not transient cities. So if you invest in a worker, they're probably going to be there forever. And so it's a good return on investment for business owners. So, and they tend to be more productive. So my answer on how I'm going to win is also on the issues, not just my identity. And when I talk to people about that, they're extremely excited about it. And I have other ideas that I could get into. I'm sorry if I'm being too wonky, but that's the answer to that question. Jobs, immigration, environment, and healthcare. Those are my 4 platforms. 3? You?
Yeah. About jobs. You know, I think we've all grown up with people saying, you know, jobs, like every car in every garage. And the wealth inequity issue along with that. So if we were able to take and reduce that inequity, but use that money that comes from that for healthcare, education, renewable energy, that would create jobs here in our district.
So you're asking about how do we maybe tax reform?
How do we get that wealth inequity to create jobs here that are centered on, you know, healthcare and education and renewable energy?
Yeah, I'm all for. There are people who literally pay 0 taxes, nothing. They need to pay some taxes. If they're benefiting from public services, they need to pay taxes. So how do we get people in Congress who are not beholden to them and are afraid to say, you need to pay more taxes? And the answer is making sure that it's a people-powered campaign. And I also think, how do we make it to where it's in their best interest to incentivize better pay for their workers? The good thing about my district, our district, is a lot of people work in the public sector. They do public work, so they get prevailing wages, and there's, you know, some kind of mechanism to where they could earn a decent living and maybe not hurt from that income inequality gap. But I think the answer to income inequality really it begins with education. I think education has always been the great equalizer. And we've gone from first to nearly the worst in the developed world and plummeting. And there's a correlation between that and the rise of income inequality. And I think they are inextricably bound. I think also people have gotten greedy at the top. but also it's happened under our noses. And I think there's been a systematic focus on undereducating people. And we see a lot of people across the country who vote time and time again against their self-interest. And so the importance of education is unparalleled right now. So I think what we need to do is educate our youth. Start with K through 12, make sure that we're properly investing in our teachers, investing in our students, making sure that they're well nourished, because if you're malnourished, you're going to be maladaptive mind. You're not going to be well educated. So we got to make sure we do that. And I think if we start there and we reinvest funds in public education, but also, Julian is known to have a lot of charter schools and homeschooling. So we have to have all the above strategy. There's no silver bullet to the question of how do we hold people accountable and redistribute wealth from the top earners down. But it really begins with waking people up and really getting people to be conscious of what's going on. A lot of people, like you said, they believe in the American dream, and they look at Trump and they think that, I want to be like him, so I'm going to vote for him. They don't realize that putting people like him in office actually makes their lives and their American dream even further away from reach. And that's because they're not, informed on the issues. They don't understand how government works. And you know what? That's not anyone's jobs. It's public servants' jobs to hear what wakes people up at night and keep them up in the morning, or keep them up at night and wake them up in the morning. And then it's my job to figure out how to make their lives easier. You have a job. My job is to figure this stuff out. But we got to make sure people are educated and they know what they're bargaining for. And I think a lot of people are getting buyer's remorse from Trump, to be honest, and Hunter, especially Hunter. Now that they know he's not his dad because of that billboard that's up there, and also he's creating his own reputation. But I really think that the best antibacterial is sunlight, and that's education. I think if the masses, if we all spoke up and spoke out, we would be able to have a more equitable tax system, and we'd hold people accountable. We just don't have that. A lot of people don't know. They blame big spending liberals for their situation when that's not true. So what I would do is I would make sure that people who literally pay zero taxes are paying taxes, and create certain incentives where they have to pay taxes. And I think we're moving in a place where we're going to need higher skilled labor, and they're going to just naturally get paid better, right? I mean, up in Silicon Valley, there's a company that's literally, they have this slogan, if it gets replicated, it gets replaced. And that means workers in fast food. They have this machine that creates a burger in 27 seconds. And they use the savings of labor to buy better produce. So there's tens of millions of people who are going to be displaced workers. But how do we get those people to fill the 6 million jobs gap? Or get them to be self-employed and become innovative? So I think there's a trend, and the answer is just, getting people trained and upskilled for the jobs of the future to get a better pay. I don't know if it's going to be imposing something on the top earners, unless we could all get people like me elected everywhere. Honestly, that's the question. I mean, that's how you do it. You have to drastically change the culture in Washington if you want to hold people like that accountable. Does that answer your question? 5?
Okay, I have a couple. You answered most of them, like your platform. If you were to change parties, what would you change your party to? Seriously.
I mean, it's independent, but...
Independent. Okay, that's a good answer.
But I wouldn't do it.
Okay, just asking.
And the reason is because the progressive movement has always succeeded when it was in alignment with the Democratic Party. And there's never been a moment in history where the progressive movement succeeds without the Democratic Party, and vice versa. And by the way, I'm really annoyed by young people my age who think that the progressive movement started 7 months ago. It's really annoying to me. The fact that you've been living and breathing air longer than me doesn't make you establishment. I think that's really stupid. So, but I wouldn't do that for the same reason that Bernie didn't run independent.
All right.
So.
The other question is, like I said, I've heard your agenda. What other things do you feel are critical for San Diego?
Yeah, so water, we talked about that. Housing. Housing is huge for veterans especially. And like I talked about, I have this affinity in the broken places. We have this strong bond with veterans that we've both seen war. And I understand that, PTSD doesn't just affect the veteran. It also affects the whole family. And so my thing is, single parent was plenty good for them in the military. Why can't we get it for them and their family as civilians? And men and women who ever wear the uniform, they spend more time, hopefully, as veterans, right, than active duty. So we need to make sure that we take care of them throughout their entire lives. And part of that is affordable housing. I think 1 in 3 kids in El Cajon, they're in poverty. 35,000 children go to bed hungry every night. And those are big issues. You know what the CRA is, the Community Reinvestment Act? There's a lot of people who take advantage of that. And they literally buy property with no intention of building homes just to drive up the cost of houses and drive out low-income people. And it's unfair. So we need to hold those folks accountable. Just like we have a CFPB, I think we need a CFPB for that kind of activity. So housing is a big issue. Hunger is a big issue. Drug addiction is a very big issue. And we need to stop treating it like it's a criminal issue. It's a public safety issue. It's a public health care issue. And I think if we reorient our posture towards those who abuse drugs and understand that, for example, in the 1980s, cocaine was very popular. And then some evil genius came up with crack cocaine and destroyed communities, and meth. And we have to understand that people who, and I don't know how many of you, and nobody has to raise their hand, who have family who have been debilitated by drug abuse and drug addiction. But what it does to the brain is it makes you think that that's happiness. And your brain thinks that you are dying without it. And for people who don't have any economic means and they live in poverty, which is typically the people who use these drugs, typically, or those who are marred by war, it gives them a sense of hope. That's what it does to the brain. So we have to treat it like a public health issue, not a criminal issue, and stop, and I think part of the fact that we privatize our prisons is part of the problem too. But aside from those 4 pillars that I talked about, housing is important, and veterans issues are important to me, but I think they fall in those categories. What I want to do for veterans is affordable health care, housing, and vocational training to reintegrate them into civilian life. So, anything else? I liked your questions. 5?
That was me.
We got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, 8?
I'll do 8. That's Meredith. My question is, in this country, it is illegal in many places. I'm sorry, it is legal in many places for people to discriminate in housing and in jobs against LGBT people. What would you do in Congress to change that?
Yeah, I would pass legislation to make it illegal. First, I think it's illegal for any federal employer to do that. I think Trump was going to change that, and then supposedly his daughter said you shouldn't do that. But I think for federal workers, we kept them safe. But I think what I worked at the Department of Labor was equal employment opportunities for all in the private sector. So we continued to add those provisions throughout the private sector, and I think we need to continue to do that. So what I would do is pass legislation that just did that on a blanket level, where you cannot discriminate. And I think we do have laws like that, but we have to better enforce them and make sure that there's penalties for doing so.
Currently, what Trump has done is to push for what he calls religious freedom, to allow people based on that to discriminate.
It's wrong. It's wrong, and also it's actually, I'm Christian, it's against the Bible. You render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So it's a non-starter for me in every category of my life. That's not for the government to decide. So, 9?
Our hostess wanted to have a question.
Ammar, I'd like to ask you 2 questions.
Sure.
An easy one. How old are you?
I'm 28 years old. I'm going to lean on the wisdom of our founders and their infinite wisdom that said it's legal for me to run. So if you think I'm too young, I'll lean on the founders. They got a couple things right.
You're young. Second question. I think that first-time people in Washington, when they get there, think this isn't so bad. And we know the old adage, they immediately start thinking how they're going to stay there. I'm interested in you said that you had, that money wasn't, I think I'm paraphrasing, you didn't say money was not a problem, but you had had many donors or you had got enough backing. I'm curious about the backing that you have, how much money that you have, and what you feel about campaign finance laws. And let's follow the money and let's talk about it.
Sure. So, a couple things. Joe Biden was 26 when he ran, and he was a senator. And he's done pretty good. So I think youth shouldn't be disqualified. It should be a strength. I'm not saying that you think otherwise, but I wanted to put that out there. Second, we've had congressmen after congressmen who've gone to Washington in this district on both sides who lose their way, right? Great public servants who lose their way in Washington. At least with me, I've been there. And I won't lose my way. I came back and I'm still doing the same thing that I've always believed in. When it comes to money, my average donor has given me about $60. And we've raised, should I tell him?
Sure.
Okay.
No
Yeah, I know. We've raised so far $90,000, which is not nothing. And I'm beholden to the people who donate to my campaign. They're ordinary folks, people who just care. They believe that, where CMR's working out there, they follow me on social media, they see I'm everywhere. And, typical DC people that I know who want to be my consultants, they're like, you have to make phone calls from 9 to 5 every day. And I said, no. They're like, you're going to lose. Good luck. And we'll see by the end of this quarter who's raised good money. And my approach is not at all to take the cookie cutter approach of just making phone calls from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I want to be there with people. And I've learned that people will reward that. And they'll say, you know what? He's one of us. And his heart's in the right place. And he's not beholden to Washington. And he's not beholden to big corporate interests. I presume later on, corporations will want to give me money for whatever reasons, but I won't be beholden to that. There are a lot of people who take money from corporations, but there's no strings attached. Some people are just like, I like what he's doing. Warren Buffett could be like, I like what Ammar's doing. Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg could feel the same way. But I refuse to take any money with strings attached. Again, I said that I'd rather lose by exploring every way to unite this country than exploiting every way to divide the country. I'd rather lose than be beholden to one interest group. Why would I want to be a congressman and be beholden to one group my whole life aside from my district? So to answer your question, and it's on record, I will not be a congressman if I have to find myself. And by the way, there are groups who have said, we could buy this election for you. AIPAC came to me and they said, we'll give you all the money you want. And I said, I want to be able to not have strings attached. If you want to invest in my campaign on my platform, totally for it.
Well,
But
you said 60 or $90. Was that your average?
yeah, the average dollar.
Out of the 90,000, you're saying that
The average was $60
less than
per
100.
person.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So, which I've disclosed a lot. I know that probably like my uncle's like, dude, you told them too much. But I'm being honest. That's just the truth. I mean, that's how much I've raised. It's pretty good. Patrick Malloy raised $27,000 the whole entire election for 2 years. So it's not usually a big money market for Democrats running in this race because people write us off. And so when DC, just now they're starting to get awake and realize that we could do something here and we could win, they wrote us off, and I'm just like, whatever. I'm going to work with my people. Like, I know who my team is. I know who my district is. And if they knew, they would have flipped this district 30 years ago. And so,
When you said someone approached you, what was I don't know those letters. What
oh,
does that
APAC is it's a big lobby group in DC, and they have an agenda, and they kind of, and I'm not necessarily against their agenda. I just don't want to be beholden to one group that isn't even in my district. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, could you just throw me one more
Sure.
nibble there? What was your relationship status as far as any relationship going in your life or anything right now?
Yeah, I had a girlfriend in